One of the quotes from one of our bishops, he talked about that the fact that he had been a counselor multiple times. And so he had a pretty good idea of what the bishop did and, kind of his responsibilities. And then he was called as a bishop and he said, I figured out I had no clue. That I really had no clue. I thought I knew what the bishop did, but until you're in that position, you really don't have much of an idea. And he said, I learned from that I needed to have been much more proactive in how I could support him. He said, I would say, oh, Bishop, what can I do for you? And he said, the bishop would say, oh, you're doing a great job, you're fine. And he said, looking back at it, he said, it's kind of tough because I didn't know all that a bishop was going through. But now that I have that knowledge, if I'm called as a counselor again, I will be much more proactive in trying to take things off of his plate.
We have a return guest on the Leading Saints podcast with Brad Agle, who recently wrote a book, and it's a crucial book you need to know about. It is the Bishop Book. That's the literal title of the book. Experiences with bishops in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in their own words. And this is a multi-decade project that Brad's been working on with his co-authors, Ron Mitchell and Camden Robinson. And they interviewed hundreds of bishops and their experience of being a bishop. What are the experiences like, the dynamics you experience, what was the hardest part, the easiest part, the funnest part, the most enriching part, and he put it all into a book. This will be a fantastic resource for brand new bishops, people who are reminiscing from the good days of being a bishop. And so we dive into all things bishop and exploring that experience. It blessed my life, I know it's blessing others, and it will continue to bless people as they are called upon to serve as the presiding high priest of the ward, the bishop. So here's my interview with Brad Agle. All right, Brad, you wrote another book. You did it. I mean, you're an academic. That's what you do, right?
Write academic articles and every now and again a book.
That's right. Now, this isn't an academic book. We had a great discussion. We'll link to that episode about is it the Business Ethics Field Guide, right?
Correct.
Which was a fun discussion. And that's, maybe to put you into context, that's your main focus is working for the business school at BYU. What's your official title there?
Yeah, so I'm a professor of ethics and leadership in the Marriott School, and I also hold the George W. Romney endowed professorship in the Marriott School of BYU.
Nice. So that's your main focus. Your
business ethics, leadership, that's my main focus. And so, yeah, our last interview where I talked about the Business Ethics Field Guide, that's my core area.
Yeah.
And just an update, which you might find interesting.
Yeah, I'd love it.
The Joint Chiefs of Staff got a hold of the Business Ethics Field Guide and really liked it and knew that they had some issues with some of our special operations forces. And so they actually ended up hiring me to create a field guide for our special operations forces.
Really?
So during the pandemic, I spent a fair amount of time sitting around talking to our SEALs and Green Berets and Rangers and Marine Raiders, talking about the kinds of ethical dilemmas that they face, and then created the U.S. Special Operations Forces Ethics Field Guide, and then went and trained our Special Operations Forces, which was an amazing experience, as you might imagine.
I bet. And then I assume you get a lot of opportunity to speak on this topic around the world, really, right?
I do, yeah. So, and that's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
It's really a lot of fun.
Yeah,
but this book...
Yes, the Bishop Book.
The Bishop Book.
If there's never been a more perfect book for leading saints to talk about, and I'm so encouraged by this. That for so many years, I've sort of felt like I was the naive one that was walking out into this world of content creation and church leadership, and there's others on the battlefield with me here. So the Bishop Book, Experiences of Bishops in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in their own words. So, and I had the opportunity to review it and really just solid, encouraging anyone from who's maybe starting as bishop or who has been a bishop, or even non-members who are like, what's it mean to be a bishop? Because I know what a Catholic bishop is, but you don't look like a Catholic bishop, right? So where's the story start for this book?
Yeah, story starts, and it starts 34 years ago.
Wow.
So, yeah, this has always been a project in the background, on the back burner. So you might imagine how excited I am that it's finally completed.
I know, I'm holding it, Brad.
Sharing
this is great.
Because even you and I have been talking about this project for probably close to a decade.
Yeah.
So it started 34 years ago. I was in the middle of my doctoral program at the University of Washington, and I was studying a discipline called business organization and its environment, which is how the institution of business basically interacts with all the other institutions of society, be it values, ethics, government, family, community, etc. And in the middle, after 2 years, totally out of the blue, I got an offer to be the research director at a new CEO institute across the country at Emory University, just been started by a Harvard professor. That today is the #1 CEO institute in the country. It's now at Yale. But it was a leadership center. And so all of a sudden, I was going to be focusing all my efforts in the study of leadership. I ended up doing my doctoral dissertation on the CEOs of the largest companies in the country, which was an amazing experience.
Yeah.
Just as we were in the process of moving from Seattle to Atlanta, we had a change in our bishop in Seattle. And I remember just thinking a lot about, well, what does our ward need? And, is our bishop effective, or what would a new bishop need to be effective? And so as I got to Atlanta and started reading all the leadership literature, I started thinking, gosh, in addition to doing this research on CEOs, I'd be interested in studying bishops. It's really, in terms of leadership, it's where the rubber meets the road, right? In
the
church.
CEO of the ward, right?
Yeah, exactly. Obviously stake presidents and obviously the president of the church is the biggest leadership persona. But in terms of where things are happening, it's really at the bishop level. And so it started off actually as a fairly traditional leadership study. Traditional leadership studies, you're looking at the behaviors and traits of a leader to try to determine which of those characteristics and behaviors lead to effectiveness. And so I'm kind of designing that study and thinking about, okay, well, what are the traits and characteristics you might think about for a bishop that might help them be effective? And then, well, what does it mean to be effective? And the dependent variable is the most critical one in any kind of research. It's like, okay, what are you trying to help us understand? In this case, bishop effectiveness. So that was kind of what was going on. Meanwhile, I'm busy because I got a doctoral dissertation to do. About a year after that, I was at the Academy of Management annual meeting, which is where all the professors in management from all around the world come together. And it always goes over a weekend. And so I'm always looking for, where's the local ward to go to? And this particular weekend, on Saturday evening, I met another member of the church who I'm good friends with. He said, hey, do you know where you're going tomorrow for church? I said, no. He said, well, you want to ride? I've got a rental car. I said, great. So the next morning I show up, get in the back seat of his rental car, and there's another LDS member who I didn't know. His name's Ron Mitchell. He gets in the back. And so off we go to find the ward in Miami. And this is pre-GPS days.
Yeah.
Well, we spent, I don't know, probably an hour and a half looking around Miami for the ward. We never found it.
Oh, wow.
We never made it to church. But meanwhile, Ron Mitchell and I got to know one another very well. And one of the things that we talked about was my idea of this bishop study. And he said, well, actually, I was a young bishop. I've already served as a bishop. And he said to me, so what do you think is the most difficult thing that bishops go through? And I said, well, gosh, obviously lots of difficult things, right? I mean, you got to try to balance all the things you're doing with your work and your family and the calling. You've got difficult welfare issues you got to try to figure out. You got people, having faith crises. You've got tragedies. People, die in untimely circumstances. You got teen pregnancies, family issues. And he said, yep, all those can be difficult. He said, but from my experience, for a lot of bishops, not all bishops, but for a lot of bishops, the most difficult thing they will go through is being released.
So true. So true.
And you've been released.
Yeah.
So you know what that's like.
It's tough.
I had not served as a bishop at that point. And that kind of came as a bit of a shock to me. I thought, well, gosh, for most bishops, going through all those difficult things, being released is going to be such a relief. And while that's partially true, as we've now done the research over the last 30 years, I found that Ron was right.
Mm-hmm.
For a lot of bishops, being released and kind of losing that mantle is a really difficult thing to go through.
Yeah. Yeah. It brings such purpose to your life. And, I often frame it that it's like you get to stand on the sidelines and of the atonement of Jesus Christ and see the power of Christ and changing lives and healing people. And then suddenly over a weekend, it's gone. Right. And that's the misconception. A lot of people think, well, isn't this great? Now you can go back to your life. But it's like, wow, it was so rewarding being in it, So
yeah, in fact, one of the fun things I've done recently is reached out to some folks for endorsements for the book.
Mm-hmm.
And as I've reached out to some bishops who've, served, and as they've read the book, I think every single one has discussed the tears that have come to their eyes as they've thought back on their service and the memories that it's brought back to them. And of course, there are lots of different memories, but no question, the most important and memorable experiences are where you literally are in the position of helping someone to bring themselves back to Christ through his atonement.
Yeah.
It's a really unique thing and a really special experience that bishops get to have.
Yeah. And so from that car ride, did Ron jump on board with your book project or the research?
He did. He said, this sounds great. In fact, I love to tell this story. So Ron Mitchell, he's a regent's chair at Texas Tech University. That's the highest position you can have as a professor, is to be sometimes called a university chair, regent's chair. He's had an incredible and very successful career. And he's also incredibly organized. He was an accountant before his academic career. And he has a spreadsheet where he has listed every single project that he's worked on in his career.
Wow.
And he was just telling me last year, it numbers over 200. Number one on that list, the Bishop Project.
Oh, that's awesome.
And so you can imagine both he and I are very excited to actually have it completed and mostly excited about being able to share it with others.
Yeah. So over those 34 years, did the focus or intent change at all? I mean, how did that go?
It did. So we did a first round of interviews, right? So one of the things you often do in research, if you're going to do a quantitative study where you're using numbers and trying to determine correlations, et cetera, it's often useful to begin with to just do some interviews and see if your ideas make sense, and if you're going down the right road or if you need to kind of turn a little bit. And those first set of interviews, we did a bunch of interviews with bishops in Utah, as well as some wives and stake presidents, and then also in the East as well. So we got kind of Wasatch Front kind of wards, and then sort of quote unquote mission field kind of wards. And probably the most important thing that came out of that was that the notion of bishop effectiveness was like Jell-O.
What do you mean by that? Like it was all over the map? Or?
It's all over the map.
Yeah, people define it differently.
People define it differently, and we were like, okay, there's no nailing this Jell-O to the wall. We're not going to be able to come up with the kind of definition of effectiveness that will allow us to do a good quantitative study looking at characteristics and traits and effectiveness. And so we quickly pivoted away from that and pivoted more to, okay, well, let's just then do interviews and basically get people's thoughts and experiences on what the experience is like. Yeah. So it became much more of an oral history kind of thing as opposed to a quantitative leadership study. Yeah. And of course, that was really undergirded when we read Elder Hale's talk on his service as a bishop. And he starts out by talking about the fact that he had served as a bishop 3 times. And each of those times he needed to be something very different. So the demands of the calling were very different. He was a very different bishop in each of those 3 experiences. And so we went, okay, yeah, I guess us trying to nail down what effectiveness is was definitely going down the wrong road. So I guess we can use Elder Holland's analogy of when he got the inspiration to go down one road when they were at when they were at the Y, and they only went a mile or two and hit a dead end, and then wait, why did Heavenly Father give us the inspiration to go that way? And he said, well, it makes sense because then I don't remember, it was 40 or 50 miles they had to drive the other way. They had complete confidence that they were then on the right road. And in that way, I felt sort of the same way. It's like we were going down this road, but we very quickly learned that was not a productive road. And then the other road we went down has been much more productive. So we feel blessed through having done that.
Yeah. And I've sort of been on a similar journey with leading saints. I think early on, I would hope that, in our human nature, we want what are the 5 principles or the 5 behaviors? Just give it to us, right?
Absolutely.
And maybe if you're writing a CEO book for a secular audience, maybe you could get there. Here's some best practices to get your, the revenues up or to change culture or whatever. But this experience is unique in a lot of ways because every ward's different, the area is different, the effectiveness can be very different, and the fact that there's no prerequisite of experience or degrees. It's you're a mechanic, here you go. You're a PhD, here you go. Let's see how you do. And it really is the great equalizer because it takes us to a place where we have to turn to God and seek His revelation, right?
So the last few years, Ron and I have been referring to the Bishop miracle. And I choke up, but it really is a miracle.
Yeah.
The bishops in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints are a miracle. You take, as you said, people from all backgrounds and you plop them in, and it's amazingly effective.
Yeah.
And so, I look at the different experiences, as you said, the different circumstances, and is it perfect? No, it's not perfect.
Right.
Nobody's perfect.
There's a lot of mistakes made at times. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, but it's amazingly effective. I think about, I'd be curious to hear your experience, my experience. I'm kind of jumping ahead. About 10 years after, about 12 years after starting this study, I was called to be a bishop. My situation was, it was a new ward. So they were taking 3 wards and creating a 4th. So my ward was a part of each of the 3 wards. Well, I had served on the High Council, so I knew a few people from the other 2 wards, but not most of them. So my first task was to bring together a group who were leaving wards they had been with, some for decades, and trying to create a new family, unity in that ward. And, that was a challenge. I think we did it pretty well, but that was my challenge. And then the second part of my service was that we were building a new stake center just right by my house. And so that was obviously a big part of my time was, the church builds the building, but there's permits you've got to get and a number of things that need to happen. In this case, the stake president lived 40 minutes away. Normally, stake presidents are the folks who are in charge of building and interacting with the church in terms of buildings. And early on, he said, Brad, you live across the street, and you have a business background. I live 40 miles away or 40 minutes, whatever it was. And I'm a physician, OBGYN. I'm going to delegate that to you. And so I spent a lot of time with that. And one of the things that I really feel great about is that the members of our ward were really active in our community. And we had terrific relationships with the leadership of our community and just the members of our community in general saw us very positively, which was really helpful in getting the permits on time and getting that building built without any kind of difficulty. And it also kind of feels good because the Pittsburgh Temple, which was just completed, The open house is in August. The dedication is in September. That temple was built right next to that stake center.
Oh, wow.
And there were virtually no troubles. We had such a good relationship with the community that it went off without a hitch. And so, most bishops don't have the experience of having to bring together a disparate group to create a new ward. Most bishops aren't going to have the experience of having to build a building and doing an open house. And so it was a unique and fun experience for me. But again, it kind of goes to the notion that we're all going to have different experiences and bring different things to the fore. I think probably one of the things that helped me is that I was already, as a professor at the University of Pittsburgh, fairly involved in the community. Like, I was the chair of the Pittsburgh Business Ethics Awards program, and reaching out. And of course, I had lots of students from all over. But that also opened doors for me to be able to meet with our local school officials, to meet with the mayor and the city manager. And so, once again, it's that uniqueness is like, oh, that was actually very helpful for me, whereas someone else wouldn't necessarily need what I brought to the table.
Yeah. Tell me about that, just the interview process. You mentioned earlier on as sort of you're aiming for, what are some effectiveness principles, and then just describing the experience. So how did you go about that interview process to get those experiences?
Yeah. So we started with a few stakes. And we just reached out to the bishops and explained that we were just trying to understand the experience of being a bishop. And so I think, just about everybody agreed to meet with us. One thing, of course, you're very sensitive to is confidentiality.
Yeah.
There are a lot of things that bishops do that are very confidential. And so we were very sensitive to that confidentiality. But we did the interviews, we audio taped them, we transcribed them. So that's the data we're working
from. So this
from.
wasn't like a survey. You didn't send them a bunch of surveys. You were interviewing them face to face.
Correct.
Wow.
All of the interviews were face to face. Yep.
Wow.
And it was a great experience. I mean, just sitting there, we actually did 3 waves of interviews. So we did one in the sort of early mid 90s, and then another one a decade later, and about another one 7 or 8 years later. What a great experience.
Yeah.
I mean, just sitting there listening to bishops tell you their experiences, and it's just testimony building, it's faith building. It was a fun project, talking to their bishops. My wife actually did most of the interviews of the bishops' wives.
Oh, wow.
And it was a great experience for her. And then talking to these stake presidents is, again, it's just such a faith affirming experience. And as I write in the book, it was incredibly helpful for me when I was called as bishop.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
I mean, we had only done one wave of the interviews at that point, but I had all the interview transcriptions. And because it was a new ward and I had to figure out who all the members were, and I had to put together a ward council of, some of the members who were in my own ward I knew, but the other 2, not so much. So I had about a month from the time I was called until the new ward was created. I think most bishops get, a week generally, but I had a month. It was over Christmas time. So I had a few extra hours. And so I pulled out all those interview transcripts and read them all. And they were incredibly helpful to me as I started my service.
Yeah.
Everything from the mundane of how do you run a ward and how do you lead it and how do you balance administration versus administering, to one bishop who had mentioned that he had overinvested. And he said it's really easy to overinvest in members. You go, well, how can you overinvest?
Yeah.
I mean, you're trying to be like Christ. It's like you're giving your all to them. But he said, yes, that's true. However, what you have to be careful about is not taking away somebody's problem.
Mm-hmm.
He said, it's their problem. They need to solve it. You're there to help them, assist them. But he said, I took the problem away from them and made it my problem.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a mistake.
Yeah.
And so just that one piece of advice is, as you know, as a bishop, you're helping people who've got problems.
Yeah.
And I just always remember, okay, your job is to help and assist and bless them and support them, but it's their problem, not yours. Your problem is to help them with their problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just those little things, suddenly you gain this new level of self-awareness, and now you can approach this role more effectively. And in here, like, you have it broken up into, so there's different sections and then chapters within those sections. So the bishop is divinely called, a bishop is a leader, a bishop is a servant, a bishop is a family man, a bishop is an individual, and then different dynamics in each one of those things. And this is, like you talked about from your experience, you had the interviews transcripts there to, like, it's not like Brad's found the secret, it's in this book, right? But just to sit with these things and get different perspectives and think, like I wouldn't have thought about it that way. Now I can put that in my cache of knowledge and move forward and maybe be a little bit more effective or skip over those pitfalls that would have gotten me otherwise, right?
Yeah, exactly. In fact, that kind of brings me 360. I told you about my first interaction with Ron Mitchell and him talking about the difficulty of being released. So I had another experience. This was Ron. This was actually in the Lubbock Temple several years ago when I was in Lubbock. We were working on the book. And Ron is a temple worker. And so we went to his temple shift, and I went and did sealing. And after the sealing, he wasn't done yet. So the sealer and a couple of other patrons and I were just sitting in the sealing room talking. And the sealer said, "So I understand you're here working on this bishop project, tell us more about that." And so I was talking about that. And one of the patrons said, I just got done serving as a bishop. I was released just a few months ago. And he said, "It's been difficult." I said, I've actually been depressed.
Mm-hmm.
I've really been depressed the last few months. And then I told him the story about my interaction with Ron. And I said, "You might be interested to know that we actually start the book with the release."
Yeah.
And then I shared the initial story that we tell in the book about the bishop who was released, and as he was driving home from the church, had to pull over because he was just so overwhelmed with grief.
Yeah.
And cried for 45 minutes on the side of the road before he could compose himself enough to drive the rest of the way home. And said, the reason we started with that is because it's such a common experience. And that brother, I saw the weight fall off his shoulders.
Yeah.
Physically.
Mm-hmm.
I just was like, wow. Because he hadn't supposed that this was a common experience.
Yeah.
He was kind of feeling badly that he was feeling this way. And for him to have this validation that no, nothing's wrong with you. This is a normal experience. In fact, it's a very, very common experience. Again, it was just miraculous. I could literally see the weight fall off of his shoulder as I told him that story.
Yeah. Is there, and we can take a quick pause here as far as, I'd love to, in that section, let's see, the
release.
The release. Is there maybe a quote or a story or whether you read it or you want to just articulate it? But I think I'd love to spend more time with that dynamic because it is a more common but less not commonly talked about,
Yeah, it's an amazing experience, and let me begin with a little bit of academics, actually.
Okay.
So my boss at the CEO Institute, his name is Jeffrey Sonnenfeld. He's a very well-known professor of leadership and corporate governance, and Jeff wrote the Business Week winner of the best book of 1988, a book called The Hero's Farewell, and it's about when CEOs retire.
Interesting.
And he has a model. He was a Harvard professor, so it's a 2x2.
Okay.
If you're a Harvard professor, you got to develop a 2x2.
Okay.
And the two dimensions in his 2x2 are heroic stature and heroic mission. So as CEO, you have heroic stature, right? I mean, you're the CEO of the company. Everybody's looking up to you. You have this stature, and it's easy to kind of have that go to your head. And, you've got an ego because everybody's kind of looking up to you and you're the person. And then there's heroic mission, which is from this experience, or from this position, you can actually accomplish things. You've been put in an authority position where you can accomplish things. And one of the examples he uses for heroic mission for a leader anyway is, he differentiates it from an individual contributor versus a leader. So he says, if you're in an orchestra and you play the violin and you retire, can you still play the violin?
Sure, yeah.
Sure. You can continue playing the violin. What if you're the orchestra leader?
Yeah.
You lost your instrument.
Yeah. Wow.
So you're kind of lost. You don't have your instrument.
Uh-huh.
So you've lost your heroic mission. You don't have something to accomplish things with. And it's the same with bishops or a CEO.
Yeah.
When you're released, think about all the great things you were trying to do as a bishop.
Mm-hmm.
You were trying to bring unity. You were trying to bless the youth. You were trying to help people obtain the blessings from the atonement of Christ. All these things, and then overnight, or in a moment, it's gone. And that's what happens with CEOs as well. They retire and poof, all that's gone. And then the heroic stature part, that also goes away. With CEOs, we often talk about going from who's who to who's that.
Right.
And in the church, we're also very good at that. We're also good at going, okay, bishop. Oh, bishop.
Yeah.
And you're not in the picture anymore.
Right.
In fact, I think Elder Uchtdorf talked about this once. He talked about sort of the stature that comes along with callings. And I like what he said. He said, you have to be very careful not to inhale.
Yeah. Right. Yep.
And that actually was one of the other things I think that was helpful to me as I was called as a bishop and was able to read these transcripts was, don't inhale.
Yeah.
It's not about you.
Right.
It's about the calling you're in. And so understand that, you're going to get released. And, and I was also much more prepared for the release because of the work I had done. So I tried very hard not to inhale.
Yeah.
In fact, it was interesting. I did tell Ron when I was called, I said, don't tell anybody, but I just got called. And he said, okay, well, you have a rare gift. You have a month to see how people treat you before you're the bishop.
Uh-huh.
So kind of watch for the next few weeks how people treat you and see if, how it changes when you become the bishop. So anyway, bishops are going through that experience of losing both heroic mission and heroic stature. And some are able to get through that just fine. Others struggle with losing the heroic mission, but didn't really inhale, and so don't necessarily have a problem with the heroic stature. Some inhale.
Yeah.
And some have some problem just becoming a regular old member again.
Yeah. Yeah, and that the idea of avoiding the inhaling, for me, like it was almost a 10-year where I was in a bishopric. I was the bishop, then in the stake presidency, where it's almost by the end of that, it almost like you'd absorb it through your skin. It's even if you try not to inhale, I was just so used to being, recognized in meetings or, oh, well, you have the final thought, right? And you lose your identity in it. So when that release does come, you think, well, I thought I didn't inhale, but it sort of just absorbed in me. And being aware of that and processing it and moving on, because I love that framing of the stature of it. Right, that recognize that it's there, and you were on that mountain for a while, and that it's okay if it's difficult to come down from that mountain.
Right?
Yeah.
As you say, it's hard. Just as you, I like the analogy you use. You just sort of absorb it through your skin.
You're right. Yeah.
Right. You don't even have to inhale.
Right. Yeah.
So
cool.
Let me share
Please.
just one story from the book. So this bishop says, on the Sunday that I was released, my counselors and I passed the sacrament to the members of the congregation. It was supposed to signify an act of service, but that was very emotional for us to do. And then, of course, the stake president got up and released me and said that I could go sit with my family. And that was very, very hard for me to do. I felt maybe like a missionary does who has to go home early from his mission because of an illness. It was like I had finally gotten the ward running smoothly and I was being pulled out. I was only in there for 2.5 years, and I felt pangs of guilt. I didn't feel the sense of relief that I thought I was going to feel. I felt like I wanted to keep doing this. I didn't want to stop. After helping the new bishop with the transition, there was nothing else for me to do, and I felt lost. After church ended, I felt like I shouldn't be going home. I should be calling somebody, checking something, or going to see the branch, anything. And it was very hard. I was borderline depressed for almost a month. But as I got involved in my new job and got everything ready for our move, that took some of the pain off so I could go on. But it was a very difficult thing. It was harder being released than it was to be called.
Yeah, such a common experience. And I'm so glad, again, that you've put it in a method that people can sit with that and process other people's experiences and not feel alone. Because I think a lot of depression comes from, I'm all alone. Like nobody else feels this way when they're released, right? But it's actually quite common.
Yeah, so. I get to talk to some of the counseling psychology folks at BYU. And as we know, our youth are struggling greatly with anxiety and depression. And one of the things they do talk about is that very thing, that it's very helpful to know that other people are going through similar experiences, that you're not alone. And I think that certainly bishops and their wives will feel that as they read the book, they'll sort of go, oh yeah, okay, yeah, I'm not going through this by myself.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, of course, the other difficult things that happened even during the call, the responsibilities put on your shoulders. I remember when I was being called as the bishop, the stake president said something like, oh, you'll probably lose sleep during this calling. And I thought, I sleep pretty well. I've been through a lot of stressful things. I'm good. I probably won't lose sleep. And then the moment, it was about, 6 months later where I was dealing with this dynamic of a family going through something very stressful and I couldn't sleep. And I thought, oh, here it is. It's happening. And so, you talk about, there's a section talking about, the mantle and the job where that heaviness at times you feel like, I didn't expect it to be this heavy. And so to hear others articulate that is really comforting and getting leaders through those tough times where it feels like the world is on your shoulders, right?
Yeah, I was actually just looking, there's a quote in the book. I'm not finding it right now, but one of the bishops talks about what an emotional experience it is. It is emotionally taxing.
Yeah. And
that is true. And most bishops know when you get home on Sunday evening, you're spent.
Yeah.
I think when it comes to being tired, my experience is physical labor makes us tired.
Mm-hmm.
Emotional labor makes us even more tired, and spiritual labor makes us even more tired. When you think about, some of the experiences of the prophets who had these amazing spiritual experiences, and what did they say? They were just just out, no energy left.
Uh-huh.
And I think you sort of experience that obviously not to the same degree, but to a large degree when you're serving as a bishop, because you're dealing with it's both emotion and spiritual. And one of the bishops says it just sort of sucks everything out of you.
Right.
And fortunately, we have wives who, some of the wives talked about the need to kind of build their husbands back up because they could see that, that had taken so much out of them.
Yeah. Yeah. And I remember that transition from, I went from being bishop right into the stake presidency. And I remember the first couple Sundays in the stake presidency, I came home and I hadn't realized how emotionally spent I was, or even mentally spent I was, until I had that contrast. Because we do these things for so long that by year 4 or 5, you're sort of just assume, I'm good. I feel great. But then the contrast after, like, oh, I was actually really exhausted. I didn't realize it, at least to that extent, So.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. So you would have, you probably didn't have as strong an experience with the release.
Right, because there was something to fill that vacuum.
Correct. Those who end up getting called into stake presidencies, they tend to not have that same experience because, A, they haven't lost the heroic stature.
Right.
Now you're actually in a stake presidency or
take it a level up or two.
Yep. And the heroic mission, it's like, well, no, you've now got a bigger organization that you're working with. So
mine definitely came later. I served in that stake presidency for 2 years before we moved, and I remember a year after that release, I had this epiphany moment where I looked at my wife and I said, I don't think I have any friends, because my friend group was built into that calling, right? We had guys' night, but it was called bishopric night or stake presidency meeting night. We get together and we'd be all focused on a really, really valuable efforts and making decisions and joking, and we'd laugh and maybe go out for gelato after every once in a while. And that brotherhood, I didn't realize was actually feeding my soul. And then it was gone, and I didn't have that anymore. And it really impacted me. So.
It's an amazingly sweet experience
to
be unified as a bishopric and as a ward council. I mean, it's just amazing. I would have bishopric meetings on Thursday evening, and they were too long.
Yeah. Right.
But they were too long because we just loved being together, and we were, we just had a great time being together. In fact, I used to joke, one of my counselors, who's just one of my best friends, he's just wonderful, very efficient. He's very efficient. And we would finish bishopric meeting, and then he would leave. And generally, the executive secretary, the other counselor, maybe the clerk, we'd sit around and talk.
Yeah.
And I remember one night, maybe it was an hour after we had finished our meeting, my other counselor said, well, the first counselor, well, I've just gotten a bunch of emails. He has now completed all of the tasks that he had from our bishopric meeting, and the rest of us haven't left the building yet.
Yeah. And obviously those counselors are great to have, but also that brotherhood that sometimes the best conversations happen in the parking lot as you're leaning up against your car, and really connecting that way. So
I to this day, I still miss that. That intimacy is just wonderful.
Yeah. Now, there may not be a clear answer that comes to mind. This is one of those questions of who's your favorite child. But was there anything as you went through these interviews, like any theme that surfaced that maybe you wouldn't have expected to surface? Anything come to mind?
I think one of the most interesting dynamics is that dynamic between a husband and a wife during that experience. I certainly understood it when I was going through that experience, but before I had that experience, that would have been a surprise to me. And not necessarily because it's not intuitive, but just if you haven't had that experience, you wouldn't necessarily think about it. Mm-hmm. So one of the things about marriage is that you share everything. And that's one of the things that really unifies you and brings you together, is you're just sharing everything. And then all of a sudden there's a wall there that was never there in your marriage before.
Yeah.
And it's an important wall, but it's still a wall. Now all of a sudden you've got a bunch of things that you just can't share. And so I know for a lot of the couples, a lot of the bishops and their wives, they talked about how difficult that was, that it really was a barrier in their marriage. Now, it's not like any of them didn't understand. They all understood, and they all knew that that had to be the case. But still, it was difficult, and more difficult for some than others. Some didn't have any problem, and maybe that goes to marriages, right? Marriages are all very different.
Yeah.
In some marriages we share a lot, and some don't necessarily share so much. But at least for those where they shared a lot, that was tricky. Yeah. And it's interesting, one of the messages of the book is that people have different experiences, and it shouldn't bother you that your experience is different from somebody else's experience. So if it's okay, let me share a comment from, this is from the wife of a stake president. And she said the following, talking about something they did. She said, I had a very educational experience. In our stake, we had a bishop's retreat every once in a while. They invited the wives to come and spend part of the time with the stake president's wife. It was just sort of a support group for bishops' wives. You know, how do you do this? How do you be the wife of a bishop? I was amazed at the variety, at how differently different women were experiencing it. Some of their experiences I could relate to, and some of it I thought, I cannot relate to this at all. This is just not the role I'm in, or it's just not the ward I'm in, or it's just not the husband I have. I mean, there are so many variables that affect what it's like being the bishop of a wife. It was perfectly clear to me that my experience was just one possibility that was very unique because of the particular situation we were in.
Yeah, so true. So true. You know, I served as a bishop at a time where I had very young children. You know, in fact, when I got called, I had no children, and it was this dynamic that I couldn't have anticipated until I lived it, where I would come home from a Tuesday night, bishoping meeting, where I was bathing in the spirit and revelation and had these great experiences and brotherhood. And she'd been on her, fourth watch of, insert whatever children's movie, and just spent, and then as those worlds, met, it was sort of like, oh, my day is going great. How's your, well, let me tell you, I'm like, well, sometimes of that dissonance of like, how can we reconcile this? And it really is a bishop or a family calling when someone's called as a bishop. And I've heard of some stake presidents who, when they do the sustaining vote in church, they have the whole family stand up during that sustaining vote, even though they're, reading one name, but as a symbol of, we're sustaining this family because they're about to go through some really difficult things. And of course, blessings come and the whole family sees miracles, but sometimes, as I interviewed my wife once about her experience, and it was like, it wasn't that we had an argument. The argument was the fact that I was the bishop, and just that the tension it created at times, and we had to step back and reassess and, maybe adjust things as how we were doing it, So.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
It's a little bit long, but let me share a really poignant story on that.
Okay.
So this is from one of the bishops says, I'm a pretty hard driving person. That's my personality. I tend to throw myself into things, and especially callings, because it's the Lord's work and there's nothing more important. So that's the way I approach my calling as bishop. And I really, really went too hard at it right at the start. I was having bishopric meetings starting at 5:30 a.m.
Oh, boy.
And it was just absolutely, crazy. September 10th, I'm set apart. 3.5 months whiz by, and suddenly it's Christmas Eve, okay? The kids are finally in bed, and I'm having a romantic moment with my wife by the fire. I decide to ask her, how are things going? And she says with a little bit of energy in her voice, oh, you're asking me how things are going? And she responded, wow, you haven't asked me anything like that, well, ever since you were called. Do you really want to know? She said, by that time I was starting to get it. I said, yeah, I really want to know. She said, awful. We never see you. We never hear you. You're not even around. You're not even really a part of the family. And we had a pretty difficult conversation. Difficult for me. It was hard to hear. But I realized that I needed to do some repenting. Actually, because I was not using my counselors enough. I was not delegating enough. I was not remembering the most important thing that my stake president said to me when he called me as bishop. He'd said, being a bishop is a heavy responsibility. It will take many hours every week, but don't neglect your family. And I was. So I happened to be conducting in January at our Sunday meetings. It was my month. I stood up and I said to the whole ward, I just had a personal priesthood interview with my wife. And I'm not doing the bishop thing right. I'm going to be delegating more, and I'm not going to be quite as everywhere all the time as I had been. So please be patient with me, ward members, as I try and figure this out, because I need to be a good husband and good father too. That was a really important adjustment.
Wow. I love that story. And again, so universal. I think that because the temptation, we start these roles, we want to do a really good job. And so we kind of lose ourselves in all the things we could do. And I often call it the calling monster of you can feed these callings as much time as you want and it'll eat it all. You want to do a 40 hours a week, 80 hours a week? Like you can find enough stuff to do in those things. So it really takes some discipline to step back and say, no, I'm not doing that, or I'm going to delegate that. And I love just that, even at times standing in front of the ward and saying, all right, I need to readjust some expectations here, right? Yeah, I love that. Love that story.
Yeah, so my father was a branch president in Michigan when I was growing up. And actually one of the joys of this project was interviewing my dad about when he was branch president. Then he later served as a bishop. And then also interviewing my father-in-law about his service as a bishop. Mm-hmm. But my dad, his first time when he was branch president, he was very busy. He was building a new hospital in town he was in charge of. And he said, it really was a blessing to me because I learned to really manage my time well. He said, I figured out I've got to serve the ward or the branch. So I've got to be really efficient when I'm at work. And so he said, I actually got much more efficient and effective at work because I knew I only had those amount of hours. So as branch president, he probably spent, 20, 25 hours a week. Meanwhile, when he was called bishop decades later, he was retired. Now he was probably a 60 to 70 hour a week bishop.
Yeah.
And as you said,
good for him, right?
It'll take all the time you're willing to give it.
Right. Yeah. And that again, though, there's such differences. And you have those retired bishops and they just love being involved or going in the middle of the week and helping someone with, at the bishop's storehouse or whatever it is. But then it's those moments where you have to step back and think, oh, I'm not in that phase of life. I need to make some adjustments. So really good stuff.
Let me share something with you. I love this. I have a high school friend who's a Presbyterian. Actually, he's a Protestant minister.
Okay.
And he was kind enough to read the book and give me feedback, which was kind of fun to get from his own perspective. And in the process of that, he sent me a little ditty that I think is wonderful, and it kind of talks about this balancing and how do you kind of do all the things you need to do as a bishop, and talks about it. It's called The Perfect Pastor.
Wow. Okay.
The perfect pastor preaches exactly 10 minutes. He condemns sin roundly, but never hurts anyone's feelings. He works from 8 a.m. until midnight and is also the church janitor, yet is an exemplary husband and father. The perfect pastor makes $40 a week, wears good clothes, drives a good car, buys good books, and donates $30 a week to the church. He is 29 years old and has 40 years of experience. Above all, he is handsome. The perfect pastor has a burning desire to work with teenagers, and he spends most of his time with the senior citizens. He smiles all the time with a straight face because he has a sense of humor that keeps him seriously dedicated to the church. He makes 15 home visits a day and is always in his office to be handy when needed. The perfect pastor always has time for church council and all of its committees. He never misses the meeting of any church organization and is always busy evangelizing the unchurched.
Is that in the book, or is it?
It's not in the book.
Okay, but I love that because sometimes that's the expectation we set for ourselves. Then we wonder, how's everybody else doing this? Well, nobody's doing that. Nobody's the perfect pastor, the perfect bishop, right?
Yeah, and there are a few quotes in the book from bishops who said, if you look at it, and actually some of these were quotes from general authorities from leadership meetings, that said, there's no way you can possibly do everything that the church handbook says you're supposed to do.
Right.
It's just, I think once somebody, figured out how much time that would take, and it's like, there's not that much time in a week.
Yeah.
So you have to kind of be guided by the Spirit and figure out, well, where are the priorities? And sometimes the priority is going to be with the person who needs the help. And other times the priority is going to be with work.
Yeah.
And sometimes the priority is going to be your family.
Yeah. Yep. Well, we could easily do an hour on each one of these sections. I'm just reading through them: leading, unifying, following, delegating, huge one, managing, shepherding, strengthening member relationships, provide assistance, serving the youth, imperfect being, juggler, giver, receiver. Any other point, principle, quote you want to make sure we share before we wrap up? Or
I love this is not from a bishop. This is from President Hinckley, and I think it's true, and I love it. We ended the book with it. This is again Gordon B. Hinckley. He said, "God bless the good bishops of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. You may on occasion be inclined to complain about the burdens of your office, but you also know the joys of your service. Heavy as the load may be, you know this is the sweetest, the most rewarding, the most important thing you have ever done outside the walls of your own home." And I don't know a bishop who wouldn't agree with that sentiment. It's an amazing experience, and it's also amazing because the ward members support you so much. I mean, the ward members, they pray for you. They're doing their best to support you. One other thing I probably did want to mention. I think it's interesting. One of the quotes from one of our bishops, he talked about that the fact that he had been a counselor multiple times, and so he had a pretty good idea of what the bishop did and kind of his responsibilities. And then he was called as a bishop, and he said, "I figured out I had no clue." That I really had no clue. I thought I knew what the bishop did, but until you're in that position, you really don't have much of an idea. And he said, I learned from that I needed to have been much more proactive in how I could support him. He said, I would say, "Oh, Bishop, what can I do for you?" And he said, the bishop would say, "Oh, you're doing a great job. You're fine." And he said, looking back at it, he said, it's kind of tough because I didn't know all that a bishop was going through. But now that I have that knowledge, if I'm called as counselor again, I will be much more proactive in trying to take things off of his plate. And in fact, one of the things that I think, one of the other nuggets of wisdom in here is that a bishop should try to delegate everything that other than the things that he can only do.
Right.
Because if a bishop only does the things that only he can do, that's going to keep him really busy. And so one has to look and say, well, what are all the things I'm doing? What are the things that somebody else, it doesn't require me to do? And those things should be delegated.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we haven't even talked about, working with the youth.
Right.
Which of course is a bishop's most important responsibility.
Yeah.
And has been given a great deal of emphasis the last few years. And so once again, being able to offload and delegate some of those other administrative or even ministering to other leaders is becoming increasingly important so that they can put their time into working with the youth. I think another message that I would share from what we've learned from this book is that those who've been called to, in a sense, step up the last few years, Elders Quorum presidents, Relief Society presidents, who've been really asked to take on a lot more of the responsibility for the leadership of the ward, think about, will you have the same experience when you're released as these bishops have? Mm. And I think it's actually something that they should have.
Yeah.
Because if you've thrown yourself into the calling in the same way that a bishop does, now it's never going to be exactly the same because you're not the person helping them, repent from their sins, at least not in the same way a bishop does.
Right.
Relief Society presidents and Elders Quorum presidents and others can certainly help in that process and in very important ways. But you can have the same sort of sacred experiences that bishops have in those other callings. Mm-hmm. And if you're not having those, maybe the message is, gosh, maybe we ought to be doing some more things proactively to have those kinds of experiences that you are going to end up missing. Now, having said that, I've been an Elders Quorum president since the change, and the membership of this church is still trying to figure it out.
That's right. Yep.
So it's difficult. It's a difficult thing. but certainly one that I think all the leaders of the church should be strive to have the kinds of experiences that bishops get to have. Again, they won't be able to do it the same way, and they won't have the exact mantle. Mm-hmm. But that mantle there's a different mantle that comes with each calling. And so I think one of the messages is, as you really magnify your calling, you'll have those same kind of miracles and blessings in your life.
Yeah, really powerful. So you and Ron have been working on this project for decades now. When did Camden Robinson come into the picture?
No, I appreciate you asking me about Camden. Camden is a wonderful young man. He's actually just graduated with his MBA from the Harvard Business School. And he was my student at BYU. In fact, he worked with me all 4 years he was at BYU. He was really instrumental in helping me with the business ethics field guide. And as he was going into his senior year, I thought, oh my gosh, I only have one more year to take advantage of having Camden as my research assistant. What am I going to put him on? And I thought, you know what, if I put him on the Bishop project, it's going to get done. Uh-huh. And sure enough, so I put him on that project, and he was absolutely instrumental in us completing the work. He's incredibly efficient and effective, and just incredibly bright. And so he really helped us put it all together. And he also provided the perspective of a younger person. Yeah. So one of the things people say, well, gosh, if you've been doing these interviews over the last 30-some years, it's like, haven't things changed? Well, clearly some things have changed, but a lot about being a bishop hasn't changed at all. But it was also nice, in addition to a couple of old guys, to get a young person's perspective on it. And since then, he's served in a bishopric and been a high counselor, and is doing great things. But anyway, I did want to mention Camden and what an incredible young man he is, and what an incredible contribution he made to this work.
So the Bishop book, Experiences of Bishops in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in Their Own Words. Where would you send people if they want to learn more about it, get a copy, and all that jazz?
Yeah, so it's available on Amazon. And if you want to learn more about the book, the website is thebishopbook.com.
Love it. Nice.
And I should say, the Bishop book, it's great. Ron and I we had a lot of time to think about a title, right? We worked on this thing for 34 years, and we came up with a whole bunch of different titles. President Hinckley gave a great talk called The Shepherds of the Flock, and we kind of thought about using that. Last year with my students at BYU, I said, okay, give me ideas from the bishop for the book. And in the end, we just struggled so much, he said, you know what we've been calling it for the last 34 years? We've been calling it the Bishop book. Yeah. Let's call it the Bishop book.
Yeah, because that's what it is, right? Just call it what it is. Really good stuff. Well, the last question I have for you is just what final encouragement would you give to a room full of bishops, maybe newly called bishops, maybe newly released bishops? What final message would you leave with them?
I love that question, Kurt. I give the advice to bishops to savor the experience. 5 years seems like a long time. As you know, it goes by very quickly. Yep. And it can be difficult and all kinds of challenges. But at the end of the day, it's such an amazing experience. So I say, while you're going through it, and I particularly tell bishops this when they've been serving for about 4 years. Mm-hmm. I said, you might serve for 6 or 7, but most are going to serve for 5. Said, particularly during this last year, just savor, just like, a good meal, right? You have a good steak, just you leave it in there a little bit longer, just to chew it a little, just savor the experience. And I think that even applies to even the beginning. Savor the experience. It's such a special experience that not that many people get to have. In fact, it's unique in all the world that you get to have a career that you choose, and also get to have this experience of essentially being a priest or a pastor. There are very few people in the world who get to do both of those things. Mm. And there's an intimacy to this calling that's unlike any intimacy in the world. Obviously, you've got a level of intimacy with your wife that is unique and special. But there's also another intimacy that a bishop has that is unique and special. And that is that you literally are working with people and are in some cases an intermediary with God, that is an experience that is truly miraculous. And those who are blessed to be able to have that experience ought to be incredibly grateful for that experience. So I would say to bishops, be grateful for this experience you're having and savor it.